Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who's not sure he wants to go on this road trip with the shade of the poet Virgil.
Tim Longo. Wow, that's a deep cut, I believe.
It's pretty deep. It goes back to 1300, so it's a long way back.
Are old. I knew it.
Yeah. You knew what it was. Yeah, that's a little Inferno reference. Today, March 24th, is apparently the day that is the first day of his trip through the underworld in Dante's Inferno. Yes. Today was apparently, although some people put it at April 7th, so it could be either way. There's like differing calendars or something. What is time? Anyway, we're actually three developers this week. So why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest?
I am excited to introduce Dave Brevik to the podcast and to talk about some of the highlights of his career. Dave is an industry veteran, programmer, designer, director, executive, and probably much more for 27 years. He started in games at Iguana Entertainment, and then eventually formed Condor, which eventually then became Blizzard North, of which he was a co-founder and then president. And then he was there from 1993 to 2003. And of course, as he's on the podcast today for, he was co-lead and programmer and designer on Diablo 1, and project lead and design lead on Diablo 2. In 2003, he went on to co-found Flagship Studios, where he led up Hellgate London. And after that, he eventually joined Gazillion Entertainment in 2009 and was everything from COO to president to eventually CEO, and led the studio while making Marvel Heroes most recently. And then in 2016, he left Gazillion and did some consulting and some other things, and then also formed his own studio, Greybeard Games, where he is today, and has released his first game, It Lurks Below. Welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you, and thanks for that introduction.
Sure. We wanted to give a little highlights there, but I'm sure we'll get into some other, things as we talk about your early days. So what the audience definitely likes to hear a little bit about sort of how people got into games to begin with, to kick it off before we get into Diablo. But what brought you into things? How did this happen for you?
Well, I fell in love with gaming at a very young age. The very first, this is going to really date me, but the very first, first game
Tim's
I ever,
very old too.
the first video game I ever played was Pong. Some friends of mine had a Pong machine that you could get. This was early 70s, 74, 76, somewhere right around in there. Mm-hmm. And I played Pong, and we eventually got a Pong machine. And I loved that. And then it was slightly after that really Space Invaders and the whole kind of thing started to explode. And by the late 70s, this was maybe 1978, 1979, somewhere right in there, my dad brought home an Apple II Plus from his work, and I kind of started programming and learning how to work the machine, and because I wanted to play games and make my own games, and I don't think I ever looked back. Taught myself how to program and just never really wanted to do anything else but make games from that kind of moment on.
That's awesome. If I had a nickel for every time someone said their dad brought a computer home from work, because that happened to me as well. It's like,
yeah. Well, and me too. My first computer was an Apple II Plus as well. So I had, I had the green book, and I forget what the color the other one was, but the basic book, and then the what was that? I forget what the other one was, but there was like a reference manual, I guess.
Yeah.
Crazy times.
Yeah,
and they had the map of like the literal hardware.
Basic.
Yeah, AppleSoft Basic. Exactly right. Yep. Oh man. Oh, it takes me back. Yeah, I wrote my first games on that system too.
So then, so jumping ahead after, what have you, college, or what brought you into the actual, game industry, I guess, officially? Was that Iguana? Did I get that right, or was there stuff before that, or?
There was one sort of company before that, but so as I was playing games in the 80s, kind of growing up and going to high school and eventually college in the 80s, I found out that people could make money making video games. And I was like, oh my god, that's in fact strangely there was an article in the National Enquirer about Richard Garriott and how he had made $100,000 making Ultima 1. And so I was like, before that, it didn't even really dawn on me that you could actually make a decent living making video games. And at that time, that seemed like a tremendous amount of money. And so I said, wow, that's incredible. Looks like I could do this too. So I really buckled down and started working on all sorts of stuff. I tried to make my own games. I tried to sell. I made a game. I put it in little baggy and I brought it to the local software store.
Wow.
I didn't end up selling any copies of my game. It was really sad. I tried. A lot of times there were magazines that like Insider magazine and things like that, where they would have program listings inside the magazines of little games that people would create, and I would type them in. And that was one of the reasons I learned how to program as well as how to debug, because often the listings in the magazines had many bugs in them. And so, I tried doing that, publishing my games that way. Didn't work out. And then I didn't really even know what to do, or didn't have any contacts or anything like that. So my parents said, well, you should just go to college and get your computer science degree. I think that they were secretly thinking he'll just get over this, right? He'll go do something else.
Yeah.
Go get your computer science degree, and then we'll talk about you making your video games when you get out.
All did in that time. They all told us, that. So.
Yeah, and 90% of kids who were, or probably 95 or 99% of kids who were told that by their parents did, but you were in that 1% who stuck with it. Yeah,
and so I went and got my computer science degree, and then came out of college and said, I want to make video games. And my parents were a little upset because I was being recruited by Intel as well, because they wanted me to do microcode for their chips. And my parents were like, I can't believe you're going to pass up that career and that great job to go join this video game company that's got it's nothing or whatever. But, live your life, I said. So I can always go back to Intel if they really wanted me. Then they can have me if it doesn't work out after a year.
Yeah.
And so I went to this video game company called FM Waves, where they weren't a video game company. They were a clip art company, which I don't know if you guys remember what that is, but it's like they would have all these images that you would put on a CD-ROM that you could put in newsletters and presentations and things like that. So, and it was just like little, you easily get this off the internet now, but this is pre-internet days. So they or just the beginning of the World Wide Web kind of days. And Mosaic and HTML just came out like late. That was what, maybe 1990, 1989, somewhere right in there. It was, so this was real early. And so this company wasn't doing very well with clip art. And they said, well, we know the Tramiels who owned Atari at the time. And they said, we can get a contract to do an Atari Lynx game. Which was this handheld machine that to compete with like Game Boy and stuff. And it was really amazing. The Atari Lynx hardware was absolutely incredible. It was way ahead of its time. It was color. It was like so much better than Game Boy. And so they had the artists to do this, but they didn't have a programmer, and they hired me to be the programmer. And I was only there for about 3 or 4 months, and I was working on a game called Gordo 106, the Mutant Lab Monkey. And every now and you can find references. You can see this game online every now and then. It's super rare. Almost nobody knows about it. There's been some funny little videos and stuff that people make on it. But because it's incredibly difficult and so bizarre. And about 3 or 4 months into this gig, my paychecks start bouncing. And, I can already hear my dad saying, "I told you so."
So it wasn't just Gordo who was trapped in Inhuman Inc.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, what am I going to do? And so at the time there was an ad in the paper for Iguana Entertainment, and I applied for that job, and they hired me, and eventually became the technical director at Iguana. And then they moved to Texas, and when they moved to Texas, that's when I started Condor. So that's how I started.
Got it. So then, yeah, Condor, which you very smoothly worked right in there. A lot of people don't know. We talked about this a little bit on the podcast, I think, on previous episodes, but that was the company that became Blizzard North, right?
Correct. Yeah, it was Blizzard Entertainment was a development company, and Condor, I mean, they weren't Blizzard Entertainment before. They were a different company, also just a development company, and then they became a publisher. And we were just a development company called Condor, and we were making games for a variety of people. For a company called Sunsoft, we were making a game for Acclaim. We were making we had a deal with 3DO. So we had a couple different companies that we were working with, making games for a variety of different folks.
Right. And so how did you get hooked up with Blizzard then, or what was the connection there? And by the way, I think, Brett, I don't remember if we mentioned this on a previous episode, but you have the original pitch document for Diablo 1 on your personal site. And from
we linked to it in the show notes. Yeah, so it was available, and I've read it. It was really entertaining read. So I appreciate you putting that up.
No problem at all.
Those are always so great, because I remember doing them internally and stuff like that at LucasArts as well, and just like the feel of that. And ours got way too involved, way too fast. But over the course of the time I was there, anyway, go ahead, Tim.
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to mention that that sort of time capsule document from Condor, and then what was the connection to Blizzard? Like, were you just shopping that pitch doc that's up there around, or what was the connection there?
Yeah, we were. There are several things. We had that pitch doc, the original pitch doc, which, like you said, I've linked on my graybeardgames.com site. We took that document, we shopped it around. We shopped it quite a bit. We would go to, this was before E3 existed. Before E3 existed, the industry would go to Consumer Electronics Show, CES, in Vegas and in Chicago. There was one in winter and one in the summer. And I think that they got rid of the one in the summer eventually, but at that time there were two of them. And so we would go to this show, and this is where all of the different game companies would go. And it was a very strange experience because it wasn't just video games. It was everything. It was, car stereos and refrigerators.
Right.
And like, we were like wedged in this, here's the video game section right next to the, the blasting car stereos or whatever. It was kind of a weird location. But it was always a fun time because, it was in Vegas. So it was cool. And we went around and we shopped this product to anybody that would listen to us. And we were, pitching it to the, EAs of the world, or whoever was there, whatever big publisher was there. And the message we heard over and over and over and over again was that RPGs were dead. And they were at that time. It was like, that was, it was a dying genre. There was nobody. The games that were being made in that genre were all they were not successful at all.
Yeah.
And it was mainly because they were very similar to each other. And they had kind of their heyday, but they just like their whatever trends and, it'd be crazy to make a platformer these days. But it turns out that, there's room for a platformer, but again, it's, nobody was thinking outside that box. They were just like, the mantra was RPGs are dead. So, I'm not going to risk my career by funding one.
Yeah. I mean, the genre had calcified, right? I mean, it's this one style of game that you do, and experiments don't do well. Like Ultima 8 in particular did not review well. And it tried real time. Although it was a kind of a weird real time, but it's like, oh, they're trying after something else and people hated it. So it was sort of, and Tim will shout at me when I say this, but it's sort of grognard capture in the RPG space, where it's like, no, this is what an RPG is. And of course, there wasn't enough of an audience to still sustain that. And that's why we think of the renaissance in RPGs that happened in the late 90s, which partly with Diablo and partly with Baldur's Gate. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we shopped this thing around, and everybody's saying, no. And we were working on at the time, another contract. We were at the show to not only pitch our product, but also to show off one of our games at this booth, at the Sunsoft booth. And it was this game, a fighting game. It was kind of a Street Fighter clone, but it was with Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and Flash, DC Comics heroes. It was called Justice League Task Force. Mm-hmm. And we were making the Genesis version of this game. And we show up at this Sunsoft booth, and lo and behold, there's a Super Nintendo version of this game being done by a different development company. Neither of us knew that the other one was in development. Oh. Neither of us had never talked to each other. Like, the producer wasn't, they didn't tell us there was another version. Like, there is magically another version, which was very weird. It's being done by this other company called Silicon and Synapse. And they, the games were strangely similar. They had kind of very similar art style. They had similar locations, similar moves. It was a little strange.
Wow.
And so we got to chatting, and they said, yeah, things are going really well for us, but we're also here showing off. We have a PC game here that we're showing off. I'm like, we PC games. We love PC games. I want to make PC games more than I want to make console games. And they say, oh yeah, us too. That's kind of in our wheelhouse. And we're showing off our first one. And so they say, you want to come take a look at it? And we went and looked at it. And that was the early version of Warcraft 1 is what it turned out to be. And they had just changed their name to Blizzard Entertainment from Silicon and Synapse. And they had been bought by Davidson and Associates, which was a educational company.
Yeah,
they had kind of dominated the educational entertainment industry. They were number one. They had Math Blaster and Reading Blaster and a whole bunch of these top selling kind of educational titles. And they wanted to branch out and make, have just entertainment division. And they had acquired Silicon and Synapse to be the basis for that. And they had changed their name to Blizzard. And so Blizzard was looking for more products and for more developers and stuff. And we said, hey, we've got this great game idea for a RPG. And they said, okay, we'll listen to it. You can come, we'll pitch it. You can pitch it to us after we finish Warcraft 1. We'll come out in January, and you can pitch it to us then. We said, sounds great. So then they came out in January, and we pitched them, and then that was that. It went really well, and yeah. we really kind of like. What's that?
Can I ask who was there when? I'm asking this basically because I don't think our audience probably gets the scale of the industry in 1990, 4 or 5 or whatever.
Right.
So when they sent out their people to take your pitch, like, who was that? I mean, you could just say roles. It doesn't have to be their names, or that might not mean anything.
Oh, it was like Alan Adham and Mike Morheim and all the bigwigs from the original Blizzard crew. It was Pat Wyatt and I can't remember who all was there, but I know that those 3 were there. But there were others as well. I think there were probably about 5 people total on their side.
Okay,
I think maybe Chris Metzen was there.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Okay, yeah, Metzen, yeah,
yeah. It's funny. I think another little anecdote there that's interesting to mention, and I actually was listening to another podcast this week, and they mentioned the same thing about that era of NES and Genesis, where a lot of times a game like the Justice League game you're talking about would literally be two completely different games.
Yeah.
Even though they would come out around the same time because they're for the two different systems. In this case, I had never heard a story where the two companies also had no idea that the other was making one, so it's like the extreme version of that, which is so funny to hear. But that was a pretty common thing of the era for the two companies to make that deal that way. So
nowadays it takes like 6 studios to ship a AAA game. they all do different parts of it or whatever. So it's a different thing entirely now.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that is in the that's in the pitch doc, and is sort of a bit legendary, of a story that maybe you can delve into, and I know you talked about it in your talk as well at GDC, but I believe in the pitch you mentioned turn-based for the original pitch for Diablo, right? And then can you kind of talk us through that evolution of shifting? Because what we do at the end of the series on the last episode before we do the interview is Brett and I kind of summarize our key takeaways or key pillars that we're extracting from playing it. Obviously not being involved, we don't know what they really were, but we kind of guess, and the real-time nature was one of the game changers, to be super silly about it, of the game. And it was always interesting to me and anyone in the industry that, the original pitch started out as a turn-based pitch. So what was the evolution of that decision / design change?
That was a big one, obviously, and kind of a profound moment in my career. So before that, the pitch for Diablo was based on this series of games. There's this game, it's called Rogue, and that's where the term roguelike comes from.
That term on the podcast, definitely.
Because NetHack doesn't work. Roguelike works, but
Anyway, there was a series of these kind of games where they had made. There was a Tolkien-esque one that was called Moria. It was Tolkien themed one that I really liked, and then they made a version of that called Moria that eventually then became this other version called Angband, and so I played a lot of that series of those games, as well as I played NetHack and others or whatever. But I spent a tremendous amount of time playing, especially Angband was one I played just so many hours of in college, and so I said, I would really love to do an updated version of this game with like graphics instead of, because Angband was ASCII. It was, you're the @ symbol and you're attacking the letter K, and the walls are hashtags, and the floors are periods and things like that. I mean, there was no, you had to use your imagination for any of the graphics or whatever. So it was basically taking that and then kind of making a modern version of that was the original kind of concept for Diablo. And so it was single player, it was turn-based, it was DOS. The original concept was that we were going to use claymation. We were thinking this would be kind of a cool thing to do because at the time there was a arcade machine called Primal Rage, which had done some claymation and made the graphics looked really great and had kind of a old school kind of stop motion feel to it. And we thought that would be really, really kind of standing apart from other games. That lasted about 10 seconds, but the original pitch did include that. And it was also going to be DOS or some other things or whatever as well in the pitch. So it ended up being a very different game than it started out to be. So when we were had this meeting or whatever with Blizzard, and they supposedly, the rumor is, and I never confirmed this because I wasn't on that, but they left the meeting the pitch meeting, and they said, "Oh, we absolutely have to do this, but there's one thing that must change, is that they've got to change that thing to real time. It cannot be turn based." And so they didn't mention this to us, and so we ended up signing the deal. And
you signed the deal before you knew about that critical request.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely,
and it should be noted for $300,000.
Yes, exactly. We signed that deal for $300,000 to do the entire development of the game.
Game development was small in 1995 or so, but not that small.
Yeah, we were paying ourselves nothing, and we were just so desperate to do this game that we thought that we could do it really quickly with a small team. But it quickly became obvious that A, we weren't going to be able to do this as a small team, and B, it was going to cost a lot more money than this. Yeah. And so one of the things we did is we actually got another gig with 3DO where we were making a game for the M2, which was their second generation of hardware, and they gave us a big contract to do kind of like a football title on the game. We had done a bunch of football products, and I had done a bunch. And I'm a big sports fan, and I had done a bunch of sports games and stuff like that as well. And so
I'm sure you're a Red Sox fan.
No, not at all. But
sorry to hear.
I'm a Giants baseball fan.
I'm especially sorry to hear.
Yeah, no, they're not looking good this year.
You're welcome for all that money we gave you for Panda. Okay, sorry. That's all the sports talk we'll do.
Wow, we win a place there for a second.
I don't want to go there for too long, but Anyway, I got a rep. I'm wearing a t-shirt right now that says "Wicked Big Sox Fan." So
nice.
Oh boy.
Well, I'm wearing my Warriors hoodie right now.
Oh, so see, you're doing okay. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about the guys in green. In the 80s, I might have, but not now. Okay.
Anyway, so
sports minute over.
Yeah, and we had I don't remember where I was in my story, but the
M2.
We had done the stuff for the M2, and so with that funding, that really allowed us to kind of like create this runway where we were actually able to spend the amount of time it was going to take to make Diablo 1. And so we started making it, and it was probably about it was at least 6 months in development. And they came up to us and said, we really want you to change this to real time from turn-based. And so the turn-based that we were doing, by the way, was not like traditional turn-based where it was I go, you go, I go, you go. Instead, we were doing things where the turns were like run in fractions of a second kind of thing. And so like you could take, it takes 1.4 seconds to walk diagonally, where it takes 1 second to walk in orthogonal directions. So it was it was kind of turn-based, but broken down. You could do something quickly. It would, drink a potion may only take, a 10th of a second or a 20th of a second, but to swing your sword may take a whole second. So we were like trying to make it kind of a complicated turn-based thing. And
that does sound complicated.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I imagine trying to run my D&D session that way and going, yeah, that'll never happen.
Well, we had the computer keep track of all of it for us, and we were just going to kind of like show who's like this turn box or whatever, turn list that it was going to show, and then you were going to see who was turn it was next. And so we started working on this, and it was going really well. And they came to us and said, "We want you to be real time." And I was really upset about this. I said, "No way, we're never making this the real time." Because one of the things about it was also permadeath, the original Diablo pitch, because all of these rogue games like Angband, Moria, etc. Rogue, these are all permadeath games, and so one of the things that really made the game exciting and compelling in my opinion, was the fact that it was turn-based, and it was like, oh my God, I'm getting down to my last few hit points here on my character. What do I do? What do I have in my inventory? Do I drink this potion? I don't even know what it is. Or do I like try and read a scroll and hope that, I get buffed enough, or that, you've been working on your character for a week and it's, oh my God, you got to get away, step up, get away from the computer, walk around, say, oh my God, what am I going to do? And you had all these kind of like exciting decisions because it was a life or death thing. And one particular movement or one particular thing could be life or death. And it was so
you
hung
were
on this.
What you're saying is you were already grognard captured.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
you had not only drunk the Kool-Aid, you had made your own Kool-Aid and then a backup Kool-Aid, and you were all set to
absolutely.
go.
Absolutely. I was just inviting people to my Kool-Aid stand. And it was and so it was a real, there was a real tension about it that I didn't think could be captured in real time.
Yeah.
And because the decisions come so fast, if it's real time, they don't, you can't, if you die from a hit or whatever, it's like, it's too fast for you to really kind of have these kind of sit down thinks about how to make this happen. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, my computer went to sleep for a second. So well, what are we going to do here? And everybody else in the office, a lot of people were like, oh no, we've got to change this to real time. Real time's the future, right? That's the old past. You can do it the crappy old way or the cool new way.
Right.
And this is very much like their real time strategy. Real time strategy was going through the change from turn based to real time with Warcraft 1 and Dune 2000 and a few others, Command and Conquer and the like, and things like that were all around this time. And so it was like this big evolution in strategy gaming. And so they wanted the same kind of thing out of RPGs. And so they said, oh, you should do this. Oh, I don't think that we will. I'm not in favor of it. And then we talked about it, and they kept bugging us about it. And then finally it came down to a lot of people in the office really wanted this as well. And I said, all right, fine, we'll bring it to a vote. So we all got together, the whole company got together in the kitchen, and we had a vote. And I was outvoted.
Wow.
And I said, okay, fine. Well, it's going to take a while to do this, but, everybody has spoken. We're going to give it a try. If it sucks, we're going to go back to the other way, but it won't, but we will at least give it a good try here. And so
how many turns was it going to take?
Who knows?
Too many, I'm sure. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
you can't make that decision.
Yeah. And so I, called up Blizzard and I said, well, we can do this. Well, I'm finally giving in. I'm finally caving on this. And, but it's going to cost you an extra milestone payment because we had this such a terrible deal. We're like trying to squeak money out of them any way we can. And this is a perfect excuse. This will delay the project. It's going to take, months for us to do this or whatever. You're going to have to give us some more extra money to do this. And they said, okay, yeah, we can do that. So I squeaked it out.
Where that story was going, I thought you were going to say they didn't, and that's good to hear that they did.
No, yeah, they did. They agreed to it, and so I said, okay, that's great. It will get back to you in a few months when this is running. And so I sent everybody home on Friday after we'd had this meeting, and I said, okay, I'm going to work on this over the weekend. And we'll see what happens, and we'll see how far I can get or whatever to make this change. And so people left. Most of the people left, went home. There were some stragglers or whatever. And I went in my office and started working on it. And I had it kind of up and running in a few hours, and had the whole thing translated to real time by that evening. But I can still remember like the first time that I ever, tested the real time nature of it. So I took like those turns that we were broken down into, how long it was going to take to travel and all that stuff. We were going to do these fractional turns. And I just ran 20 turns a second to see, what it would be like if I just ran it. 10 turns a second, because there was all tenths of a second or whatever. If I just run 10 turns a second, what's that really, I'm going to convert this thing to real time. We'll see how that goes. And so I had this warrior on the screen, and he had kind of this mace, and there was a skeleton bad guy. And I said, okay. And the whole thing had been set up to kind of like use the XCOM. XCOM is the first version of XCOM. We were big fans of that game, and we actually used the cursor that you would highlight the blocks with in XCOM. We used that cursor as the basis for the tiles and size of the graphics for Diablo. We actually screen capped that exact size and used that to be the basis for all the graphics for Diablo.
Wow.
So we had that box in there still, and I clicked on the skeleton, and the character walked over there and swung and broke the skeleton apart, and it felt so good. And it was just like this amazing epiphany, and it was if like the clouds had parted and the sun came down through my office window and the angels sang. Yeah. Oh, it's like, oh my God, this is so amazing. This is so much better than I ever thought or could ever even imagine that this would ever be. We are never going back to turn-based. This is amazing. And I can still remember that moment like it was yesterday where I'd first clicked on the monster and I ran in the other room screaming, oh, you got to come see this. And there were only a couple of people that were left and everybody else had gone home. And I like called Max and you got to see this. Anyway, the people came in Monday and they were just like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And we all knew at that point that that's the direction we were going to go. And a lot of the design changed and stuff to accommodate the real-time nature of it. But it was obvious that was the right decision.
Wow. Okay. So I have two observations. I mean, one is democracy works. And the 2 million difference. No, I'm not going to even go into the real politic of today. But the second thing is like you're the one of the co-founders. I don't mean what your title was at the time. I don't know, but
I was president.
Yeah, so you're president of the company. You're the guy on a Friday night coding this thing up and making it work. I mean, it was a different time in games. To be like, oh, yeah. I'm going to go, okay, we got to figure this out. Everybody go home. Like, there's nothing you can do right now. I just need to figure this out and see if we can do this thing at all. And
right.
And then you have one of the most influential moments in video games over the last 20 years.
I am smiling ear to ear right now. Like I am just listening to this.
I mean, we both know, Tim and I both know, you have that moment on a game, probably your first game, where you're like, oh my God, I just made this thing happen. I've never seen that happen before. And I can remember mine for Starfighter. I'm sure Tim has his on Mortimer or whatever the hell with his thing. I'm picking on Tim again because I do. But I mean, that's an amazing moment of just like, I see a thing and I'm like, oh, I've never seen that before. Like it's your excitement is coming through in this. Like I can hear your heart race. And it was 24 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It was a long time ago now.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
And I love that you've distilled it down, the simplicity of distilling it down to just this one skeleton and this one warrior. And it's actually a cool little detail because we've played XCOM on the podcast as well, and we had Julian Gallup on to talk about it. And I kind of have a memory of that cursor as well. It's those little details that are just very interesting to me when we kind of talk about some of this past stuff. But I agree with Brett. Yeah, the energy at which you're telling the story is just amazing. What happens next then? And if we don't have to go into sort of super in the details, but you mentioned really quickly there that some things had to change once you made that decision from a design perspective. And it's very fascinating to know that sort of all you did was take the sort of rules that you had from the turn-based side of the game, or version of the game, and just kind of made it happen, per second. But what were some of the things that would come next for you once you made that decision to redesign?
Yeah, well, there were so many things on Diablo 1 that we did that were very different from anything in the RPG genre at that time. From kind of the theme, there were so many like classic D&D elves and dwarves and dragons and stuff like that, and we didn't want to do that. We wanted it darker and scarier, and we had this real-time lighting, and we had like this unusual perspective, and there are so many things. And one of the things that we also decided was that we had this kind of, one of our favorite games in the office at the time was this NHL 94, which was a superb game where we would like run tournaments in the office, and we'd have everybody have their match of the day kind of thing, and we would do these big tournaments with everybody in the office playing this game. But one of the cool things about that is that you could just get into the game so quickly. It was like you're on the main menu, you're clicking a couple buttons, and bam, you're in the game killing stuff. And I mean, fighting or playing hockey or whatever you want to do. But that's what we want. We want to bypass everything, all the stuff that so many RPGs were doing at that time, where it was like, oh, you have to create your group, and you have to make 5 characters, and you have to decide what classes and allocate all their points and give them a back history and like tell a long story and all these kind of stuff. And it was like, when do I start, killing monsters? And so we wanted the time to killing monsters to be as short as possible. And so, I think a lot of these decisions were made to kind of speed up the process and make it more of a kind of a loot, kind of killing monsters and finding treasure kind of game. That came from everything. But there were a lot of decisions of what you could do in the game that had to be kind of simplified, from drinking a potion and things like that. It used to be that you would do something, oh, I'm going to unsheath my sword, and that might take a tenth of a second or something like that. But it didn't make any sense to even have that in the game. Right. If that was going to be a design thing. That was kind of remnant also of the old style of game, and we wanted to get rid of it for double reasons. One, it doesn't make any sense in this context anymore, and two, that's kind of an old-fashioned way of thinking. So
yeah, I mean, I think that it comes from paper, pen and paper, where it's like, well, you need to have those backstories so that your DM knows what to do with your character in the second or the third or the fourth adventure or whatever. They need to find a way to make it richer for you as a player. But this isn't that game.
Right. Exactly. We're telling the story. We already know the story. You're just so we don't need any information from you. We just need you to get down and start, bashing some skeletons. So I think that that a lot of those things, the speed by which you like create your character, we wanted it to be kind of like Doom speed, or we wanted it to be, NHL 94 speed, where you're just click, click, click. I'm in the game, and now I can go down to the dungeon and kill stuff or whatever. And so that's the kind of experience that we wanted to give. And so cutting a lot of these things out that maybe were taking time and that we shouldn't take time, they should be instant now, and things like that. Drinking a potion, unsheathing your weapon, and then like you can do spells in real time, and all these kind of things that we hadn't really considered. Anyway, so it was it kind of in some ways changed the design a lot, but it didn't change it that much because we still had a lot of these designs and concepts in mind that from all along. We still had the same kind of items, and the randomization of items and monsters and the dungeon and all that stuff existed from the very beginning. So there's plenty of basis to kind of like work with that gave us a good foundation to move forward.
So as a segue from there, and you mentioned, I guess the two parts that I'd love to hear a little bit more about. One, the loot system, and it sounds like maybe from your original design that didn't need to change much, and then the roguelike dungeon creation, tile set and such. But on the loot system, so that didn't change with the real time. But when it comes to one of the things we talked about on the podcast, one of the topics that we hit pretty deeply was the loot system and its influence on the rest of the industry, really up until today. It's still a critical design sort of paradigm, to sound douchey about it, that people copy today. So what was the genesis of that, combining it with everything else going on. Was there an inspiration there for you guys, or what was the genesis of that?
Yeah, that it was absolutely came straight from the Angband Moria rogue style games. Those games had randomly generated levels and randomly generated items, and especially with Angband, it had not only randomly generated stuff, but also kind of like specific items that still had random elements, but you knew you were going to get a certain set of features and a certain set of requirements when it was creating that item. So it was a unique item. It had its kind of own stats, but there were random ranges on those stats for that item. So it would have a specific name, it'd be called something, and then it would have these kind of like all these attributes all the time. And so you would
even, I'm sorry to interrupt, but even like you need to have a strength of this to use it and a dexterity of this to use it. I haven't played Angband. I've played some of the earlier ones like Moria and Rogue. Yeah, so I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
The requirements too.
Yeah, they had requirements and stuff too as well. And so you would get these, randomly generated items. Angband's still around and still supported quite a bit, and it's free. It's easy to play.
I played it for 10 minutes once, and I was like, okay, I can't go back this far anymore.
Yeah.
There's a point at which
anyway, I think the game's changed quite a bit, and in some of the requirements and stuff, I think that they've changed or whatever. But because we do a stream, and we recently did on stream. We went back and we had played Angband. My wife and I did a stream together, and so we had recently played it. So I've got a kind of a fresher memory of what that is like. And maybe just I'm misremembering the way it used to be, or I think it's probably most likely been modernized in some ways. But it did at one point have these requirements, like you're talking about.
Wow, wild.
So what about the other thing I want to delve into a little bit, which maybe you kind of covered, but if there's any other tidbits of or anecdotes, the tone and the setting, and I'd say maybe I'll wrap in lore a little bit in there too. Such a specific choice, and we obviously also brought up Doom at the time and Doom 2, etc., because of the sort of tone there. And to be honest, until you mentioned it just now, a little while ago, it didn't really dawn on me how non-Tolkien this was.
Right.
And for whatever reason, even though I've played so much Diablo in my life, I just didn't kind of put two and two together in that. And it's still luckily, is that way today. So that sounds like that was very intentional on your guys' part to really to break away from that, because I don't know if I don't have any data or statistics on this, but I feel like for whatever reason, not only because of the real-time nature, but because of that tone and setting, I feel like it actually resonated with more people than I would have expected. Like non D&D playing Tolkien people that I knew at work at Lucas at the time were playing that I would not have expected. And I'm wondering if maybe that the tone and the setting was part of that. So that was like, how did you guys come upon that? Like, what was the story behind that decision?
Well, the story was that was mainly, Eric Schaefer, he and Max, they wanted to not go with that traditional route. They didn't really like elves and dwarves and stuff like that. Where I was like, it's fine with me. I like that kind of stuff. But they said they kind of insisted, and since they were doing the art, they got to insist all they want. Go ahead. I said, that's fine. But then, I want kind of dark, undead, scary kind of things, because that's my jam. That's what I like the most. And they said, yeah, that's fine. We'll compromise. So we'll have some made up monsters and demons and stuff. And then we'll also put in some skeletons and things like that. I said, sounds good. Then we met in the middle. And so there was a definite decision to get away from there were two reasons. One is it was going to be less art, because we didn't want to have a warrior and a wizard and a rogue and have all of these different
sizes of humanoid
classes, and then have I've got human, I've got dwarf, I've got all these choices to make or whatever, And so it was, again, another choice that off of a menu that we could get rid of. Which race are you? Like, we wanted it to be humans. We wanted it to be a little bit more plausible. We wanted it to be a little bit more relatable. And we also wanted to make it dark and scary. And that was the amazing, incredible, the beautiful, the pioneering soundtrack from Matt Ullman. Made a huge difference in the atmosphere and tone and stuff like that as well. And working with him and saying, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for scary. We're looking for dark. We're looking for, and for him to go off and create what he created and really solidify the atmosphere. We were so lucky to be working with him and have so many talented folks working with all together on the project.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot to grab onto there. I mean, one is like so one of the things that you do, and I'm hearing this also from previous topics, is like there's a trade-off from sort of character-oriented drama, I want to even say player-authored drama, from character creation, all that stuff, that you're trading for immediacy. It's like, no, you're okay, here's 3 different style of play, but like, you can't pick I'm an elf versus dwarf, etc. So that there's all that sort of character drama that just drops away, because do you need that in what you're trying to do? Probably not. Like, I mean, when you play, I mean, I know a lot of these text-based, Angband and Mori and all that stuff, they have classes, but you're still like the @ symbol. You look at yourself, and you're just this one little character, and you may have slightly different verbs, but all that back history and the drama that a human DM can draw out is useless in a computer game, certainly in the 90s, and arguably today. So, I mean, it's just like, why spend all the time on that just for the trapping? So that's a great, I mean, it's just great. And yes, the music, fantastic. A thing that we talked about more than once, in terms of how it impacted us.
Yeah, I'm glad that came up naturally too. Yeah, I was going to ask for sure, but it's one of those soundtracks that that most people remember, and it just sticks with you. And not having gone back to the games for a long time myself, but as soon as you load that town up, it just like instantly nostalgia just kind of just rushes back in. And yeah, it was definitely hit the tone hard in that regard. And one of the themes that I love what you're adding in here to give some color to, one of the themes that we pretty much talk about almost every one of the games that we've played, the series that we've played. I don't know how many games we're up to now, Brett, but
too many.
Not too many, but
not enough.
We'll see how far we get. But constraints being such an important part of the process, especially back in these days, and you just mentioned a small tidbit that I want to pull on, is just that concept of, taking out choices, unnecessary choices like what race you're going to play, but also not wanting to have multiple size characters or multiple, artwork to do. So you chose human. But then the irony of that constraint that you put on yourself that worked well with the setting and the tone becomes a sort of a cornerstone of the whole franchise in a way. And it's sort of, whether intentional or not, sounds like pretty intentional, became, I think you mentioned the word relatability. And it's just, for me, being a dummy that didn't think of this ahead of time all these years, it's such a key differentiator for this RPG franchise, because nobody else really does that even today.
No. Yeah, it's not really used in RPGs. Still today, there's so many fantasy-based RPGs. It's pretty crazy.
I mean, this is D&D Christianity or whatever. I mean, it's it's the Herodrum, whatever. I mean, maybe they're Opus Dei. I don't know who they're supposed to be, but they're it's angels, it's demons. It's also a simplified worldview for the enemies. In that sense, it's like it's the undead, it's demons. That's all kind of on a simple axis of evil. It's not very complicated. There's not beholders and things that have ecologies that were written up in Dragon Magazine or whatever. It's like, oh no, these are just things that used to be alive, or things that are literally evil. that's what we have, so
yeah, we kind of cut to the chase. There was not a lot.
Yeah, and I think that simplicity works well with the real-time nature of the game. We talked a lot about simplicity and distilling things down in the series, and all of that, you don't like. There's just enough lore peppered into this particular game to give you a sense that there's there's a bigger world out there, but it's not necessary for just clicking and killing. It's the basics,
right.
which.
And that was another thing that we were trying to do with the product, is that so many of the RPGs at the time were, deep, complicated stories and tons of dialogue and things like that. And we just wanted to get rid of that as part of the experience. We were never really big fans of that style. Don't tell me the story of what's going on. Let me play the story. Let me make my own story. And that was really one of the things that we wanted to focus on, was just making this simple story, a simple concept, and you worrying more about the actual playing of the game than you are worrying about the, getting from one cutscene to the next or whatever. So that, that was a very different approach as well, compared to many games at the time, and still even many games today.
Yeah, it's that same drama immediacy sort of scale that I'm discussing. It's like, okay, how much of this is in your head versus what you're actually like doing with your hand and seeing on your screen, and obviously hearing in your ears as well. There's that. It's very immediate. Every part of it is very immediate. Like, I have to deal with this thing right now. None of the rest of it really all that matters. Matters all that much, I guess.
We just played, as I said, we played multiplayer right before recording, and we made sure that we played at least down to the butcher. And talk about immediate.
As we were both chased around the level, and both of us died, at least once, and
it's just such a classic moment. I mean, I don't know how many times I've killed the butcher in Diablo 1, but just reliving it just now, and that sense of just us both screaming and running, and it's just great. But yeah, you had a segue there that I just lost.
I'm sorry.
Oh no, it was your point about like the stories that come from playing rather than being force fed the story is a wonderful, wonderful quote as well. Because I think that's sort of that's something we talk about from time to time, especially as games started getting more and more emergent and the sort of water cooler stories. But the segue for me there is multiplayer. And my memory of playing this game at LucasArts was we were lucky enough to be on a LAN, and so we would all play together. And the stories that we would tell had nothing to do with Diablo or the lore or whatever. It was that epic corpse run. It was that epic, butcher run or whatever. And so what can you give us any tidbits on the multiplayer aspect of it? Like, how did that come to pass and seemed like it probably was a pretty critical goal for you, or was it accidental? Or
goal for Blizzard, maybe not for David.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely a goal for Blizzard. And so they said, we're going to make this multiplayer. And, from the very beginning, it was one of the things that they wanted, those were the two things. It should be real time. It should be multiplayer. And they talked to us about multiplayer earlier, and we're like, yeah, multiplayer. Yeah. Okay. And so, and then it kept going on, and it's, multiplayer. Okay. Yeah. Multiplayer. Yeah. Sure. Multiplayer. And
David, I want to interrupt at this point because you were a guy who had programmed entirely in assembly up to this point.
Right.
And I think about, like, if I were an assembly programmer and trying to do something that was networked, I'm pretty sure my brain just exploded all over my living room right here. Like, I just I don't like, assembly is hard enough. And then it's like you add just plain networking. I mean, it's just set apart like all the lag and latency. I mean, just like a million issues that happen with real time. But I have to take in these messages that come from who knows where and integrate it into this state that I have at whatever time. I came into the industry shortly after you, and I'm in awe, sir. I mean, you've been an assembly programmer. This is your first C game, as I know from the GDC talk, which also kudos, because you couldn't have done that in direct draw and direct whatever else you were using at the time. It's a lot. It is a freaking lot to think of this game as like, oh, I had to do all this stuff. I learned this new language. Also, I learned networking. I mean,
well, luckily I didn't have to learn it that much. I mean, I had
what I'm saying.
I had a tutor, a very helpful tutor that did a lot of the networking work, which was Pat Wyatt, who now, like lately, I think he's like one of the tech leads at Amazon. Anyway, he and so he was a superb programmer it was down at the Blizzard in Irvine, and he came up. So like 6 months before we were going to release the product, they're like, okay, now multiplayer, we got to get this running, but we also have this other idea. Okay, hear us out. We're going to invent this thing. It's going to be called battle.net. And what we're going to do is we're going to allow people to play the game sort of like we're going to come up with our own service. At the time, there was this another one of these things. A popular one was called Total Entertainment Network, 10.
Yeah, I remember.
And you could go on there and play, Doom or Quake with your buddies and things like that. Everybody could like link. It was like a hub to meet other gamers and hook up and play multiplayer games. And we're going to come up with our own service called BattleNet, and you won't need to go to one of these services at all, and you'll be able to play with other people. And it's just kind of a chat room where people can meet, and then we'll send them off into a game or whatever. And I said, "Oh, multiplayer."
Sure, BattleNet. Sure, that'll.
So I said, well, that sounds like a really cool project. Maybe you guys should integrate it on this side. And they said, okay, let's take a look at your multiplayer and how that's going. And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, about that multiplayer. I don't know that much about how to make a multiplayer thing. I was hoping you guys could help me out. And so Pat moved up to the Bay Area to work on Diablo and lived basically at our office. We were kind of living there anyway, kind of crunching through the end of the product. And so he came up and he lived in a hotel kind of nearby the office, and we would work on the multiplayer for months and got it running. And he did a majority of the multiplayer work. I mean, I helped him out or whatever, but he was kind of guiding the entire thing and telling how to do the process. Once he kind of did a lot of the base integration or whatever, it was easy for me to kind of get involved as well, hiding the latency between monsters and the other clients and stuff, because it was a peer-to-peer model. The first Diablo 1 was peer-to-peer, where everybody was running the copy of the game on their machine and running it for all the different players and kind of making the decisions for themselves and then kind of notifying everybody else what happened.
Was it deterministic? I assume it was deterministic for like,
no. That's why there was rampant cheating.
Okay. There you go. I was going to say, like, okay, he drops gold for you and for me, right? I mean,
well, you were deterministic for your own self or whatever. Like, you decide what loot you get. You decide what, what monster you killed, and then you would notify everybody else. And if somebody said, "Well, I already killed that monster," it wouldn't do anything, or it would just the monster would die, and it would look like you hit it or whatever. And
amazing.
Then this thing, this item popped out or whatever. Yeah. It would like send messages back.
Yeah, we didn't talk with Darren Stinnett, who was Dark Forces, and we won't go into this, but you had his overlay for the map and all that stuff. You talked in that about the new GDC talk. We'll put that in the show notes again. But like he said once, talking to me, he was like, well, we kind of, like, the hard part for networking is like, what do people see? and it's like, well, what you see on your machine is like, okay, once we've decided to give you that thing, we can't take it away. So, it sounds to me in Diablo is very similar. It's like, okay, well, you killed that guy and he dropped a thing. And for you, he dropped that thing. We're just not going to even lie about that. He dropped that thing. We'll just deal with it. It's fine.
Absolutely, and so there were little formulas that we would use to change the odds when there were more people and things like that. But overall, it was easy to kind of simulate. Hey, this thing died, and I was the one that killed it. I'm notifying everybody, so I determine what it dropped or if it dropped anything, and then everybody else kind of deals with that. And sometimes, rarely, you would get situations where there are conflicts and stuff like that. But it was there were very few cases where that was, and they were pretty easily resolved. We were, just erred on the side of being generous. So
that is
but it was
probably
it was
my
pretty rare
favorite phrase in gaming. We erred on the side of being generous. I don't feel like a lot of large publishers say that anymore. So I just want to sit with that for a moment. We erred on the side of being generous. Okay.
It's a rarity.
I love it.
It is. So, we invented BattleNet and got it running and made Diablo multiplayer the last 6 months of the project.
Yeah, that's just crazy. It's so cool to hear that span of time. So in that case, because Warcraft 2 was the first RTS for them on BattleNet, right? So was Diablo the first BattleNet game?
No. Diablo was the first game on BattleNet. BattleNet did not exist before that. Warcraft 2 came later. Out, Retro got added.
It was added later. Okay, so maybe in one of the expansions or something.
In an update or whatever later became another game that you could play over BattleNet.
Yeah, I mean, wow. I mean, cheating aside, like that's such a core part of the story of this game. And
absolutely, to be able to play a game for free over the internet, out of the box.
I mean, I was on the cusp of joining the industry, and I talked about this in the last couple of shows on the cast. Like, if I trace my getting into the industry, this is one of maybe 2 or 3 games that I can point to and say, like, this is the game. And honestly, Diablo is probably the game. Whereas, like, oh, this is a thing. It connects people. And like when I was a kid, it didn't really connect people. I was an Apple II kid as well, and it's just like it didn't really connect people I knew. But when I was like, I played Diablo, and I went, oh, I can play this with the guys I played. I played whatever games with in college, so not all computer games. Like, this is a game that I can go. I play this with my friend in New Jersey, and like we just sign in. Right. We put in a password that we agreed on the phone. I guess. Like, I don't even know how we agreed on that stuff. And tonight we played a game multiplayer, and we used the password "Bad Clams," which is the same password I used in 1997. To play with people on the internet. I didn't tell Tim that, but that is literally the same password we used because we had Red Tide on the East Coast in 1997 when we played Diablo on the internet. I mean, it's just this game.
Nice callback. That's good.
Yeah, thank you. Work. I mean, this game was it just transformative. I mean, for me and for a lot of the industry, but I mean, for me in particular, just like, oh my God, computer games. Like, I remember playing Load Runner. Oh, that was cool. I remember playing Ultima. Oh, that was cool. And now I was playing this thing on the internet with friends who I graduated college with and going, oh, these are a bigger thing. This is a big deal. Yeah. So, and I feel like anybody who is kind of my cohort, and Tim is sort of my cohort, even though he's like 30 years older, I feel like we all look at this game and are like, oh, wow. Like, this is what games can be like.
Yeah.
So, especially RPGs, like a nerdy thing, things that people, mainstream people didn't play. This is a game that ties us all together, and we go, oh, we got to play this thing. Yeah, we let go a lot of the stuff that the DM had to do. And we all played it together. And of people who have been in the industry 20 or 25 years, I think this is the game.
Yeah. And the other thing we talked about, and I think that, that's well said, Brett. And I think that the tendrils, one of the core sort of goals of our podcast is to talk about sort of the influences and how how these games impacted the industry, as Brett has in his intro, and the tendrils of this game in particular. And obviously, we're preaching to the choir here with you being on, Dave. So we don't need to tell you this, but so maybe this is a little bit more for the audience. And we have a fair number of some younger people in the audience who who didn't live through these eras the same way we did, and the looter shooters out there or what have you, like the Diablo is the underpinning for a lot of these sort of structures that people don't know. The system alone was, and as you said, you had influences as well, of course, but some of these structures are just are everywhere, and it's not just RPGs.
Right.
So thank you for that, Dave, and thanks to your team as well.
It was more than just me, but
yeah, exactly.
It takes the team. Yeah, the two Schaefers, and there's a lot of people involved in these games.
A lot of team members, and it sounds like you guys worked really hard on a game, and really in those time, in those times, a short amount of time to be as well. So, thank you for coming on. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Dave,
I want
to ask, what are you doing these days? I know about It Lurks Below because I've gone and looked it up, but I want our audience to hear about it.
Yeah. So the latest thing I'm working on is a game called It Lurks Below. It's in early access on Steam. It's a PC game. And the best way to describe it is Diablo meets Terraria, where it is. It's a kind of got the view and perspective of Terraria, where it's kind of from the side. It's got some pixel art. There are other games like this, like Starbound and some others that are kind of this side world kind of view, and you kind of do some digging and things like that. But it's very much a Diablo-like RPG. There are 8 different character classes that you can play, and they have a bunch of different skills. They all play very differently. It's got a random dungeon below the world, and you dig down and you find, rooms and monsters and fight your way through and beat bosses. And it's very action oriented, random items, random generated dungeons, 4 different difficulty modes, and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, it's been in development started working on it. It's been 2.5 years now, I guess. Yeah, about 2.5 years it's been in development. And I'm doing all of it.
It's all in assembly.
I am doing the... Yeah, no, it's not in assembly. It's in C. I don't program in assembly very often anymore. It's extremely rare that I program in assembly. And I often feel like my assembly's rusty enough or bad enough now that it would probably be slower than the compilers can do.
Here's the thing. We've never talked about this. Assembly, nobody programs in assembly anymore. I mean, it's like you run like 5 lines of assembly. I mean, maybe shader code is sort of assembly, maybe, but like C is a good language if you're writing on a VAX or VMS or something like that. Right. And so we use these things that convert our thoughts into computers that are vastly more complicated than they were 20, 25, 30 years ago, because they have so much more going on. I didn't say that to be snide. I just said it because it's like none of us can code assembly on these. We can't. I mean, we can understand it. We look at it and we're like, oh, I see what the compiler did with my code. But it's more like, I mean, we just look at it and we're like, oh, okay, I see. Like it can pipeline this thing, and like, oh, there's 4 pipes or whatever.
Right.
For coding interested, listeners on the podcast, go ahead and email. I'll reply. Probably not spending minutes on it on the podcast. No, I mean, it's great. I mean, it Lurks Below is really interesting looking. I put it on my Steam list to check out because it's very cool. I was like, oh man, this is the thing a person can do. And I was like, I started to think, like, what can I do? So still inspire people 20-something years later.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure you mentioned it, but I wanted to make sure people understood that you were doing it all on your own too, which is a feat and an awesome.
Yeah, I had gone from where I was, the last job that I had, I was CEO at Gazillion Entertainment, and we were working on a game called Marvel Heroes and a couple other projects. But I I became CEO kind of late in the process. There were a bunch of the company had like raised tons of money, made all these different projects, had a bunch of different developers, and the projects kind of didn't work. And so I got the lovely job of laying off a lot of people and kind of righting the ship as much as possible. And the project that I had signed up to work on there originally was this Marvel Heroes. I was going to be the creative director. One of the lessons I learned when I was at Flagship was that I was wearing too many hats when I was at Flagship. I was doing the coding for like collision detection, and I was helping run the business, and I was designing the game. And it was like, I just can't do all of those kind of things anymore. I've got to focus. So this time I was just going to be creative director on the project for Marvel Heroes. And that lasted about a year. And then there were all sorts of problems. And so I started speaking up, and then the board members started coming to talk to me about asking me questions. I started answering it. They start promoting me. Eventually, I'm the CEO of the company, where I'm not working on the products almost at all anymore. I'm just working with investors, and I'm talking to them, and I'm like going out and raising money for the company and things like that, where it was a very different job than what I wanted to do, which was make games. So after I left, I said, I'm going to get back to actually, I'm not happy being a CEO where I've been this way for a few years. The company's going pretty well at this point. I'm ready to move on and do something on my own, get back to actually making games. So then I think I've gone and, had a little overreaction. I said, I'm going to do everything myself this time. I'm not really sure how smart that is, but, it's kind of a fun challenge to be able to do things like do the art and the music and the sounds and the programming and the design and stuff like that. And I was very nervous when I actually put this game on Steam. It was like, I've been working on this thing in my office, working away. And I didn't know if this was all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, or if I actually had something kind of interesting. And so it's been really fun to have it out there and be in early access and get a lot of feedback and work with the community. And I really enjoy that. We chat about the game every day. I patch a lot. I've patched the game, and we've been in early access almost a year coming up. It's been about 11 months of early access now. I've patched the game maybe like 150 times. So, I patch a lot. There's always new additions, new things coming in all the time. And it's just been a really fun process.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I could spend another hour talking to you about just that. I mean, just the you climb this ladder to be a manager of some kind. For me, I topped out. I led like 30 people, and it's just like you get so far away from actually writing the thing. Like when people ask you, what did you do in this thing? And you're like, well, okay, well, I told a person to do that, and I told a person to do that, right? I mean, you get very, very far away from like the immediacy of like, I did a thing, I compiled, and I looked at it, and it's like, oh man, this thing happened, right? And there's a huge distance, and that's a big story of our industry as well over the last 30 or 40 years, is that just people who were good at taking an idea they had in their head and making a thing that happened on the screen became management. and that is a huge story, and it's probably not a story we want to spend an hour on just because it's not fun. Right? I mean, honestly, I don't want to.
Yeah,
it's depressing or not. It's just like it's not. It's a happenstance. It's not. It just happened. We were really good at doing the things we did. We happened to be reasonably good with other people, even as programmers, which is absurd to say. It turned out that we founded companies, or we moved up in management. We led a lot of people, and we got away from the thing that we made. And now we're like, I want to spend some time making things again because I remember what that was like.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, my thought process here was that when I was a kid, I didn't grow up and say, oh, someday I want to grow up and be a CEO. I wanted to grow up and make video games. And so I wanted to get back to that, the actual making something. It feels so, it makes me happy, right? Yeah. That is one of the things that brings joy to my life, is making a game and entertaining people. That is just, and so getting away from I'm just managing, I'm just dealing with money and investors, to I want to get back to actually making a product. And that was critical
I love it.
for me.
And as another programmer who started basically on the Apple II, more or less the same time you started, I just my heart goes out. And yeah, I mean I'm doing that now. I'm a small indie company and all that stuff. So it's just like, oh, every day I get up, I write code. You know, and it's just like,
yeah.
When you say the
So
angels, the clouds parted, the sun shone down, the angels, and it's just like, oh, that's me every day when I code. That is what it's like.
Oh, I get it. I get it. Sometimes I'll have some thought in the middle of the night, and I'll just get up and go downstairs and start programming.
Do it.
I'm so excited about doing something for my game.
And it has been so wonderful, David, to have you come on. Thanks so much. Your history is terrific in the industry. You've made a huge impact. I mean, there are not a lot of people who can go like, oh, this is a person who had this impact, and like drop a 20-pound bag on the table and go, oh shit, 20 pounds of impact, whatever that means. But I don't know how to measure that. But you've had this huge impact on the industry, and David, I appreciate that, especially as a programmer and being able to give a hard time to Tim about it. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks for being on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Welcome back from the break. That was
epic.
It was the start of a 6-hour podcast that I'd like to do.
Yeah, we didn't even scratch. I mean,
it's hard.
I was looking at my notes from all 4 episodes, and yeah, there's so many things we could have talked about, but we hit some good ones, some really good ones.
We did. And I feel like we had a lot of sort of personal moments and a lot of sort of...
That's the good stuff anyway.
Yeah, it is. It really is just like how I experience the industry is the thing that you want to connect with other developers about. And, with David, there was several points for me as a programmer that I was like, oh yeah, like
I think you were crushing hard.
Oh my God.
David.
I've got a lot of these like leftover Valentine's Day candy hearts.
Yeah, send them his way.
Like, you're my Diablo, and
okay, all right.
Yeah, I know. You can possess me anytime. Like these are pretty dark. Okay, yeah. I'm gonna put these aside.
Don't go there. Yeah.
I'll eat them later off cast. But anyway, I mean, yeah, no, I'm just fantastic to have David on, and he was, some of these stories he's told before, but also I feel like we had moments where he hadn't prepared for them, even though he had told them before. He also just like, oh yeah, now I'm going to talk about this, and it was a little bit more raw because it wasn't on the schedule he had set or whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because his talk was in 2016, right? So
yeah, it was a few years ago.
Fairly recent though, but yeah. So, but no, it felt much more conversational and just fun back and forth. So
yeah. So again, I mean, a person I could buy several beers or bourbons or scotches.
Yeah, you owe people a lot of rounds.
I do.
This podcast.
I set aside, because of this podcast, I set aside a few dollars every month. I put it into a compounding interest account, and someday. No, fantastic talk.
Good.
So thanks again to David. For those who want to see what he's up to, again, his it lurks below on Steam. It's a really interesting game. It's in early access. Like, the graphics aren't all that. They're actually simpler than Diablo in a lot of ways, but he is pushing
pixel,
on the design.
It's pixel game.
Yeah, it's pixel art, and he's pushing on the design aspects, and it's super interesting. And like, looking at that and thinking about this interview over the past week, I'm like, oh, maybe what about this kind of game with some of these ideas, and maybe pulling in this other idea from another game. And so it continues to be a seminal game for me personally, but as we've talked about on the cast, for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, yeah, and the one thing we didn't talk too much about that luckily he covered a little bit at the end there is BattleNet itself,
Yeah.
and the genesis of that, which is another key variable to things even today. So yeah, it was neat, and I didn't remember that Diablo was the first one to really use it. I did know that at one point, but that's it's I'm glad that came up because we didn't hit that very much.
No, I mean we kind of pushed aside the multiplayer stuff, in part because we played some of that today on stream, on my stream, and
got the
then,
butcher,
and we got the butcher, which is, I mean, the most important part.
but we both died. I think
we both died.
I died twice.
You died twice. We each died. And but no, I mean there's something about that multiplayer experience that transcends games.
Man. Yeah.
It is a thing that, like, if you talk of people of our generation of game developers, we all had. I mean, I just can't even. I would look side eye at a person who said, "Oh yeah, I've been in the game industry 20 years," and if I asked them to say, "Oh, did you ever play Diablo?" and then they said no, I'd be like, "Huh?
Imposter!
Yeah, you're a fake. That's impossible." And maybe if you were from Japan, I guess maybe. Like, I don't even know who.
Or maybe you're hardcore console developer.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, there's probably like some very thin layers of people that you're like, "Oh yeah, okay, all right, that's okay." But for the most part, but even those people, you'd be like, "You didn't play Diablo? Like, what's wrong with you?" Yeah. So it's especially the multiplayer. I think it's a transformative moment in games, and I don't know why we took 3 years to get this game. We probably should have played it first or second, but yeah, here we are.
Yeah. Well, there's others who probably missed you. We're not exactly
perfect.
completely
and the fact is, I mean, there's some games we choose not to play just because they're hard to play over the month or whatever that we choose to play games. So it's a thing. So we're not going to play Zork anytime soon because not only can go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, I don't know. Zork, I think would be fun and funny to play, even if we don't do a full 4 weeks. But this conversation with Dave did make me think that we might want to at least do a bonus episode on Rogue.
God. Or Moria.
I know.
Yeah. I played Moria on the Mac. I mean, I totally remember it. Yeah.
Yeah. I played Rogue on my PC, but or a version of it.
No, I had a TA who played Rogue as well, obsessively. Don Tomasello out there, I see you.
Didn't do his work, his job.
I'm not even gonna go into just what to kind Don Tomasello didn't. But yeah,
no,
we don't need to know about.
I don't want to
third year.
I don't want to know
at Penn.
No, I don't want to know Don's situation. But maybe we've talked about some of those early ones even.
No, I mean I think about that. We're going to be together in August, and I'm like, maybe we play an adventure game, a text adventure, and we just read the text and play it on stream and talk about it, and just have an episode like that, and do some other games like that where it's like, okay, there's not a lot here because computers were
be a bonus month.
Were simple. Right. I mean, they just couldn't do much.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the time where it's like we play these things that are really, really deep and inform so much. But the games he's talking about are those games. NetHack, Moria, Angband, I mean, and Rogue. They're all games that you're just like, oh yeah, like I've seen people playing that, or I've played that myself. And there is that moment where you're sitting at your computer and going, oh my God, what do I do next? And having that moment of real drama of just like, well, I don't even, like, what do I do? I have these few things in my inventory and I have this or that or the other thing that I could do. And what do I do? Like, I'm just going to agonize over that for 2 or 3 days, as he says. That doesn't fly with gamers of even 96 or 97 or whatever, but it was a thing in the 80s. That was how we played.
Yeah. Well, and I think because we've talked about this a lot, but because we've expanded to where we are today, I think that mentality has a place. It's just more focused, and I don't want to say niche, but it's our whole
well, I mean, we say
Dark Souls
sure.
conversations,
but we also
cetera,
say niche,
right? So,
but it's like, oh well, okay, but now a niche is like more people than played games in 1980.
Yeah, no, that's
right?
what I mean.
So it's a weird
the
thing.
Space
to
is
say.
broader. Yeah.
It's a question of taste, and the taste of people who had played earlier had sort of seen the sort of where this thing could go, and it ends in some ways in Diablo, in one direction, and certainly in other directions it ends in things like Baldur's Gate if you're talking about RPGs. So at some point we're going to have to tackle that 100-hour RPG Baldur's Gate. That's just there's no getting around that. Not this year.
No, I don't know when.
We will. I think we have to. I mean,
we do. Yeah. I know we do. We played Torment, so,
but
we were in the ballpark.
But,
no, it is. It is for sure. Yeah. Definitely different. But I'm sure we'll.
Okay.
Does have a co-op mode.
Does.
Though, but yeah,
it's a thing. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to set that aside. So we had a number of emails. We have a lot of emails, and I sent Tim a bunch, and there's a bunch more. And so we're going to try to cover all of that next week when we're going to play some Diablo 3, see where this thing ends up, at least so far, because so far there hasn't been a Diablo 4 announced, despite some stuff at BlizzCon last year. I'm curious. I played Diablo 3, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago with my son. Played couch co-op on the PS4, but now it's a thing with seasons and all this stuff that I don't personally know much about, and Tim knows more about.
Yeah, I got it on Switch recently for travel, and just because I love the Switch, and as the podcast knows, big handheld gamer in general, and so that. But when they ported it over there, I hadn't played any console versions. I'd only played Monk on PC, and I'd finished the campaign, but not done really much else back when it came out. And I'm deep. I'm hooked on the Switch version. It's perfect for my commute and stuff. And I've gotten into the seasons thing, to just see what the adventure mode, how deeply they use that for the seasons, and so there'll be a lot. I think there'll be a lot to talk about there, just as a bonus episode.
Yeah.
And it'll be very interesting to talk about, the original, and then in the context of the modern conventions, because they definitely have modernized so much in a good way.
No, I mean, absolutely. And I think that the multiplayer aspect, which hasn't been a huge part of our kind of discussion over the last 4 weeks, is really how the company progressed. Both between Diablo, but also World of Warcraft, obviously.
Every one of their games has a key cornerstone of multiplayer to it, and so it's interesting to talk to both Bill Roper and Dave about it, because clearly that was a part of the pillar of their company, not just the games.
Yeah.
Because they added it to this one, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, real time multiplayer. It's like if you had to say Blizzard, and what are their two things? Real time multiplayer, I think, are the other two things that they sort of brought to the industry and really transformed the industry around. They're not the only ones who've done it. I mean, we will not ever argue they're the first to do a thing, but they found the way to do it that everybody imitated, that everybody looked at and said, oh no, they actually found the full formula for doing this thing. So yeah, that'll be really interesting to look at. So
mail next time.
Yes, we will do. Yeah,
D3.
we will do mail next time. We're going to do some more Diablo 3. Tim and I are going to stream that on my Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/Brett Duville. You can also find Tim on the internet on Twitter
at Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
And of course, you can find the podcast there at Dev Game Club. And you can send us email at devgameclub@gmail.com, even though it's been a couple weeks since we've had the time to fit that into an episode. We will. No, next time we're going to catch up a bunch, and it might spill over a little bit because we had a few more even than I thought. But we will get through all of it, and we appreciate every email we get. And also every review, because those help us reach new listeners. So if you have on your platform of choice an opportunity to review us and maybe leave some recommendations for folks in terms of text, by all means do so. And if you put it in terms of lyrics, I will sing it. And Tim will shake his head on the podcast.
Okay.
It could happen. I'm trying to get Kirk Hamilton to review my singing on his podcast. Okay, that came up on the Twitter. Okay. Thanks so much for joining us this week. Thanks for listening to our interview with Dave Brevik, and for Tim Longo and myself. Good night.
Good night.